welcome back, Weirds and Weebies, to the channel Bitch and Doge, where today I've been playing the Overwatch 2 beta, because I actually managed to get in. I know I haven't covered Overwatch content on this channel before, but I have been a pretty big fan of Overwatch since it first came out in 2016, although I dropped off a few years ago and didn't play for quite a few years, back when Brigitte was first released, and I've only really started getting back into it now that I have it on PC instead of on console. I'm sure most of you already know what Overwatch is, even though I haven't covered it on my channel before. But just to very quickly sum it up, it's basically a 6v6 teamwork-based shooter. Or at least that's what it was, because Overwatch 2 is moving to 5v5. Now before I get into this, even though I imagine most of you watching this will have heard of Overwatch, even if you haven't watched Overwatch content or been really following it recently, at the same time there's a lot of confusion around what Overwatch 2 is even supposed to be. So let me just clarify that. There's been a common sentiment on the internet that the Overwatch 2 beta has been pretty disappointing because it feels more like a glorified balance update to the first game rather than a new game. And that's a fair argument to have because Overwatch 2 is very similar to Overwatch 1. But the problem with that is that's actually what it's supposed to be. I'll try and keep this explanation short because I've already tried to record this before and I thought it got a bit long-winded. But essentially, what the devs want to do with Overwatch 2 for the most part is create new exciting PvE content, as in co-op content where the enemies you're fighting are all just computer enemies, whereas the teammates you have are real people. And that's where all the new stuff is going to come in. Only this beta at the moment is just for the PvP, which they are going to update, but they're not trying to make it a completely different game with the PvP. In fact, if you have Overwatch 1, you won't have to buy Overwatch 2 for the PvP. You'll only have to buy it if you want the PvE. What we're calling Overwatch 2 is essentially just going to be one big update for Overwatch 1 when it's finished. So you can see why there's been a lot of confusion around this, because this is very strange and unusual. I don't think I've ever seen another game go about its quote-unquote sequel like this, but that is exactly how it's going to go. With all that said, let's get into the other changes with Overwatch 2. Of course, as you might expect, there's been a couple new maps added, and there's even been a new mode added to the game to replace an old one that no one really liked. 2 CP maps are gone now, as in 2 capture point, where, well, it's just what it sounds like. You just got 2 points to capture and that's it. And push is very similar to the payload game modes we already have, like, well, payload and hybrid. Only push has you try to, well, push along a robot, and the robot can be pushed both ways. It starts in the middle of the map, and the enemy team tries to push it to your spawn while you try to push it to the enemy spawn. And whoever it is who gets their barrier pushed the furthest and the closest to the enemy spawn, it will be the winner. But this is where you can definitely understand a lot of people who didn't realize that Overwatch 2 was going to be more like an update to what we already had than a completely new game in terms of PvP, when they realize there's only one new hero added to the game, Soujorn. For me personally, it doesn't bother me that much that there's only one new hero because I already kind of geared myself up knowing that there wasn't going to be many new heroes. There was only guaranteed going to be Soujorn, and I wasn't exactly optimistic there would be more than just Soujorn for this beta. But obviously a lot of other people thought after so long without hearing much from Overwatch that there would have been more to come with this, so I can understand the disappointment of people who weren't already in the know. That being said, by the sounds of things, they do have other characters that should be ready to go and put up on the servers in not too long. They just wanted to kind of test things out without adding too many new heroes to the pool. Because of course, as a beta, a lot of the things they're testing for right here are not just that the game works and it can handle servers at scale, but also the balance of the game, especially with it shifting to 5v5, because that has a lot of balance concerns with it. And so if they added a whole bunch of new heroes, which they don't know if they're balanced or not yet to the game, at the same time they switch to 5v5, it'd be very difficult for them to discover what the issues are and what needs changing. Anyway, I don't think I'm going to talk much about Soujorn, which might seem a little bit strange to you, but she is the new hero. However, there's a couple issues. One is that she's a DPS hero, and I am definitely more of a tank or support player. I'm very self-aware. My strengths in Overwatch are in game sense and strategy and all that, and positioning. It is not in aim. Oh, hey, I got one. And so playing DPS characters where basically all of it is in your aim, like all how well you do for the most part is just how well you can aim. Yeah, I've tried to get some gameplay with Soujorn, and I have a little bit, but I've basically been throwing every game I've been picking as Soujorn no matter how hard I try. Also, I'm not gonna lie, she is definitely fun to play. I'm not saying she's a bad hero. She is fun to play, but just in terms of the ideas of what she can do, it's nothing that crazy or out there. It's nothing that new. She plays kind of like Soldier 76 in a way, but a bit more athletic and a bit more kind of flanky and running around. She basically has this little machine gun thing, which is quite accurate, but I think has a lot of damage fall off. She can do this combat slide, which allows her to move faster, and she can cancel it into a jump, which will then go much further and higher. She has this disruptor shot, which doesn't seem to do a lot of damage at first, and also slows enemies inside its radius. But if you do manage to get enemies trapped in a situation where they can't escape it, and they stand at it for the full duration, it's more than enough to fully kill most characters. But of course, the thing she's most known for is, of course, this railgun ability. Essentially, as you shoot your targets, you'll charge up your railgun, and a fully charged railgun shot is a hit scan as far as I'm aware. I think it has no damage fall off, and it deals 100 damage at base when fully charged. Uh-oh, did I just say it? Did I just drop some Overwatch terminology? Okay, there's no way this video is going to be short. Alright, so quickly just to fill some of you in who aren't aware, there are two types of weapons in Overwatch, and honestly this is actually the case in quite a few shooters. But projectile and hit scan. Projectile weapons take time to have their bullets reach their destination. They work just how you'd think they would. They create a bullet in the game. That bullet probably has a spherical hitbox, so they just create a sphere, or invisible sphere around the bullet, and then they move that invisible sphere forward with the bullet each frame, and each frame they check, okay, is this sphere touching any other one else's like spheres that are supposed to signify where their hitboxes are? If it is, then they got shot. If it isn't, then no one got shot. That's how most guns work. However, there are some guns that fire bullets that move so fast that there's not really much of a point in doing it that way when you could save processing power by instead just drawing a straight line and checking if any opponent touches that straight line, in which case they got hit. This helps to save on processing power because, as you can imagine, it's easier to just check if something's touching a line rather than create a sphere and then move that sphere every frame and then check if that sphere overlaps with any other spheres. That takes a lot longer than it does to just simply draw a line and be like, okay, is anything touching that? But it also gives you a genuine advantage in the game, because now that quite literally means if your weapon is hit scan, the travel time for your bullets to reach your enemies is quite literally 0 seconds no matter how far away they are. For anyone who has a hit scan weapon, they are much more able to shoot at people miles away without them having any chance of dodging, because there is literally no time to dodge. Yeah, they can still move around erratically to try and mess you up and try and get you to miss, but if you hit a shot on a hit scan, you hit a shot. There is no way that they can get out of the way before your accurate shot would reach them. This is why you might hear people asking you to switch to hit scan if there is an enemy Farah to deal with. Farah, of course, can fly in the air, and the main reason that's so strong is because that means there's a massive distance between her and the people she's shooting at, which she can take advantage of if the people that are below her don't have hit scan weapons. Because with that long distance, she gets a long time to dodge any shots that are fired at her, and she can be basically unkillable. Whereas if a hit scan shows up, now if anything, being in the sky makes her more vulnerable because there's no walls to hide behind, and she can't dodge those shots. You can only make it harder for the enemy to hit them. You can see how, especially when there are characters who can fly, like Farah, or just generally characters who are very good at dodging, like Genji, having your weapon be hit scan is actually quite a big deal in Overwatch. Oh, and also, I'll just get this out of the way now because I know I'm going to mention it at some point in the video, but I don't remember when. I also talk about getting dived. That's essentially just when a hero that's especially good at ignoring all your frontline defenses and going straight for your backline, which obviously is usually a support heroes trying to heal everyone up, when they go for you. So again, typically characters like Genji, they can just slash through shields or tanks and just go for the supports. Sombra can obviously just go invisible and then appear behind the supports. Even tanks. D.Va is a dive character because with her boosters and defense matrix, again, she can just charge right through a defense and kill the supports first. That's what I mean when I say you get dived. Anyway, I think this little tangent has gone on long enough. Shall I get back to my past self? And a fully charged railgun shot is a hit scan as far as I'm aware. I think it has no damage fall off, and it deals 100 damage at base when fully charged, which might not sound that great, but remember you get double damage for headshots, which means that one headshot with a fully charged railgun will insta-kill most of the characters in the game. So yeah, my impression of Soujorn and why I've been so garbage at it is that she pushes advantage really hard. You either lose with her really hard or win with her really hard. I have had a brief moment of a few games where as Soujorn I'm just steamrolling, but then the rest of the time I'm doing terrible. And a lot of the time it comes down to, if you have charge, it's easy to get more charge because you're probably getting kills with that charge and then using those kills to be able to go further into the enemy team without dying, and then, you know, getting more charge because you're getting up in their face and all that, and then you get more shots, and it just, you know, you push your advantage really hard with Soujorn, but the second you lose it, you fall behind really hard. I'll keep it brief because I don't want Soujorn to be the focus of this video, but my general opinion on her is that I imagine that people who are good at DPS and just naturally have good aim and reaction time probably are going to be able to use Soujorn really well, and she's going to be quite a strong character. But I think for the average player, Soujorn's going to seem pretty weak, just because, you know, you really gotta land all your railgun shots, and also to really make, like, I'll put it this way, if you could headshot every single one of your railgun shots and get continuous railgun shots, she would be an unstoppable beast. Everyone would walk up to you and you'd instantly one-shot them. Technically, her railgun has 100% precision, there's no spread or anything, it always fires exactly where you point it, there's nothing that can mess you up except your own aim. So if you've got someone with good aim, good reaction time, constantly getting railgun charge, always landing headshots, yeah, the enemy team won't even be able to go one step without getting eviscerated. But that is assuming everything works perfectly, and for most players that's not going to be how it is. And God, do you feel every single miss when you play Soujorn. It hurts your soul to watch those railgun shots miss. Oh yeah, I haven't talked about her ultimate either, but I have to admit, I do think it's one of the weaker ultimates out there. But I definitely see that it has the potential to be really strong again if you're really good with the railgun. And if I remember correctly, assuming that you just fire railgun shots and don't do anything else, you can get 6 railgun shots in with this ultimate before it runs out. Anyway, that's Soujorn, but I don't want to make that the focus of this video because, as I say, I'm not a damage player, I definitely don't know what I'm doing with Soujorn, I know she's a new character, but of course there are a lot of other people you could go to ask about Soujorn who will probably know a lot more about playing damage in Overwatch. But then you might be wondering, who do I want to talk about in this video if Soujorn is the only new character? Well, technically Soujorn is the only new character, but when I said that Overwatch 2 is kind of like a big glorified balance update or rework for Overwatch 1, I really meant it because there are a couple characters who have been changed so drastically, they are basically new characters now. And those two are Orisa and Doomfist. First of all, Orisa has now been reworked to be a little bit more aggressive. If you didn't know, most people didn't like Orisa. They thought that she was very effective, but also very boring to play. Now, personally, I'm one of the very few people who actually found original Orisa in Overwatch 1 quite fun to play, and I'm quite sad to see this. But I have to admit, I completely see the arguments people are saying. Essentially, because Orisa was so slow in the first game, and she had so many abilities that were really good as you just needed to hold one position, they thought it was bad game design to keep her as she was, because essentially she promotes situations where you just hunker down, you've got the advantage already, you just sit on the point with a bunch of shields up, anyone comes up to you, you pop fortify, survive any kind of stuns or whatever, like tank that damage, your healers heal you because the healers are happy and safe behind those shields. And of course, in a good organized team, you can really abuse Halt to just pull people right into danger and kill them for it. Just everything about how Orisa was in the first game seemed to promote a very sedentary kind of gameplay style. And as I say, even as someone who enjoys Orisa in Overwatch 1, I'm not going to argue that. The main reason I enjoy Orisa in Overwatch 1 is because, as I mentioned, I play a lot of both tank and support, and it feels like Orisa is the closest we got to a tank support hybrid. I know you might say Brig, but honestly, pre-nerf Brig, it felt more like a support DPS hybrid to me, and now maybe, but I don't know, I played a decent amount of Brig. You'd be surprised if you don't play Brig much. The way she is now, she doesn't live very long without teamwork behind her. In current Overwatch, you cannot lead the charge into battle as a Brig in most situations, and that's of course kind of something that a tank should be able to do if they're really a tank. Anyway, I'm getting a bit sidetracked. Orisa was definitely a tank, and even arguably a support, because of the fact that obviously her Halt ability was most effective when used in combination with other people's abilities that would be more effective if they knew where the enemy was going to be in a second. Or, like, abilities that, like, oh, the enemy just goes behind a wall, but then you pull them out from behind the wall. And of course her ultimate supercharger. All that said, though, she's now completely different, and she now plays a little bit more like a tank DPS hybrid. The only thing she's kept is Fortify, which even then got some changes, which now it gives, I think it was 125 over health, which is just a temporary health that goes over your maximum health bar that's like the normal maximum. It also, I think, reduces the damage even less, if I remember right. I don't remember what it was before, but I think it's a 40% reduction to all damage you take while fortified. You still have immunity to all stuns and pushes while fortified. And the only downside is you now move slower while fortified, which I'm not going to lie, I thought you already did, but apparently you never did. Apparently it was always just you move at normal speed while fortified. So now you move a little bit slower, but even still, so just a little bit slower. That's the only thing that really stayed the same, though. Her main weapon is pretty similar, but definitely different. She now has infinite ammo, but she can overheat her gun, so you have to obviously be careful not to do that. The shots are quite big and still pretty accurate, and still fire at about the same rate, so it's pretty easy to land your shots overall. And I think it does more damage just from playing this new Orisa a decent amount. It feels like I can go for kills a lot more, but that might just be because of my new abilities. I've also heard, although it's kind of hard to tell while playing when there's a lot going on, that the bullets that are shot out of this new gun get smaller the further away they travel, so it's both harder to hit them and they deal less damage the further away the target is. This seems like a relatively smart change, because I think another thing some people didn't like about Orisa is I believe the original version of Orisa never had any damage fall off, and even though her weapon wasn't Hitscan, it was projectile, it took time for the bullets to reach its destination. It did have the issue of you could just shoot someone from a million miles away and still be doing max damage, especially because her gun has basically no spread. Anyway, since she also lost Halt, she now got a new right click, which allows her to throw a javelin, which is an extremely brief stun. It knocks people back, it deals some damage, and if they get pushed into a wall by the javelin, then it deals extra damage, kind of like Doomfist punch. They also got a new ability where they spin their javelin in front of them, and essentially it acts kind of like Sigma's grab in that any bullet that touches the spinning javelin gets deleted, although it doesn't give you overhealth for doing it. And while doing this, you can not only use the spinning javelin to hurt and push forward enemies that touch it, which you can even use to push them off the map, but also you get some slightly increased movement speed while doing so, but only if you're walking forward. Overall, the new Orisa, I have to say, I will admit, it is really fun. The only thing is that I kind of am a bit concerned by how much she just kind of plays a bit like a damage hero now. I don't know, like, it just feels like you go for kills a lot more with this new Orisa, which, again, that's not necessarily a bad thing. We'll see. It seems like you're surprisingly able to deal a lot of damage as Orisa now, but it means that you spend not quite as much time on the point and a lot more time kind of just charging at whoever you think you can pick off. So I get a little bit worried just for some Orisa players that might just go charging into the back lines of enemies while there's no one to push the payload or whatever and losing games because of that. I get a little bit concerned about that. The only thing I will say, though, that I don't like about the new Orisa is her new ult. Now, I get it. They didn't want to have this kind of bunker down composition be good in Overwatch 2, double shield as they call it, because you'd run 2 shield tanks. Because that had been the meta already for the past 3 years of normal Overwatch since it went so long without any significant updates, and it's been so good that whole time. I get it, and I get that Supercharger played into that strategy a lot. Also, though, I really like Supercharger, and I was really sad to see it go, and I'm really sad to see the new ult that's replaced it. I don't know, I've not heard anyone saying it's bad, so maybe I'm just bad with it? But I've done great as Orisa with everything else. I'm not gonna lie, her new ult feels garbage. It feels really hard to kill anyone with it. I don't understand how I'm supposed to use it. I feel like I might be misusing it, but I don't know what else I'm supposed to do with it. So essentially it's called Terra Surge, and what she'll do is she'll activate her Fortify. It doesn't use the cooldown, it's like an extra Fortify when you use this ult, and she will kind of hold her spear up into the air and suck in all nearby enemies to be directly in front of her. And she'll start charging up, and then the next time you click, she'll slam her spear down on the ground and deal, I think it was up to 250 damage to anyone in its range. But it's got a short range. And that might sound good, but here's the thing. To get that maximum damage of 250, you need to charge it for a full 4 seconds. So yes, it does suck nearby enemies into you when you first use it, and yes, it does give you a Fortify so that you take less damage while using the ult. But still, you're a big target that sucks every enemy nearby close to you, and then has to wait 4 seconds before doing a close range attack to even land the ult, and then even when you land it, it can only insta-kill, like, low-end DPS heroes. It won't be able to insta-kill anything big, like, you know, you won't be able to insta-kill the new Doomfist or, like, Azaria or whatever with it. You can only do, like, just a decent amount of damage with it. So I feel like every time I use this, I either have to attack with it early, but then not get any kills off of it. I still get damage, but just not get any kills off of it, because if I waited any longer, they wouldn't even be in the range and I'd get 0 damage. I have to wait the 4 seconds, but then usually if I stand there and wait 4 seconds without being able to move as a big target, even with the Fortify, I usually end up getting killed for that. Or I have to just... Like, I don't know, the only way this ult seems to work is I have been destroyed by it once, and that is, in combination with Nano Boost, it is very good. I mean, I know that every ult in combination with a Nano Boost is kind of good, but like this one especially, because the main problem with it is it seems like it does about 100 damage a lot of the time when I use it. Like, you can usually charge it enough to get about that much damage and still hit people in your range, but 100 isn't enough to kill most characters in the game. They'd have to be damaged already, and they'd have to also not get away, which is kind of a difficult set of circumstances to meet. Whereas with Nano Boost, which doubles the damage of it, if you end it early, you still usually get 200 damage, which is at least enough to kill a squishy. Also, the Nano Boost provides a 50% damage reduction on top of the fortification you already have, so it's basically not an option to try and kill the Orisa while she's using it. So I will say that with Nano Boost, it seems like a really good ult, but it feels like you really need that Ana on your team, and of course it's already expensive to spend 2 ults just to do this combo. I don't think it's necessarily unfair that Orisa's ult is so bad, because it seems like Orisa without her ult is so good at the moment in Overwatch 2 that that's fair. Like, I don't know. I don't know what the consensus is. It seems like Orisa's that kind of character which a lot of people who just play the game casually complain about being OP, but most people who are able to, like, you know, play the game at a higher level don't seem to think she's OP, they just seem to think she's good, but balanced. And that sounds about right to me. Orisa may be far more capable of killing people, but on top of that, she also struggles a little bit more to just hold her ground. Yes, she can do it with the Fortify, and yes, she can do it with the spinning Javelin move, but with the Javelin move, she can only do it from the front, and with Fortify, she can only do it if they don't have any kind of massive source of damage. I know that might sound a bit obvious, but, you know, stuff like Bastion and things like that, there's a lot of situations in which the enemy can have a sudden burst of enormous damage that usually is telegraphed and you need to get out of the way of. With something like the Javelin spin, you can delete that damage, whereas with Fortify, you're probably still going to die, because even if you significantly reduce it, it's still enough to kill you. I do wish, though, that her ultimate did get replaced with something different, or at least reverted to Supercharger. Again, I don't know what the best solution here is, but I really don't like this new ult. I know maybe it'd make her a bit overpowered if she had a better ult, but at least if she's going to have a weak ult, make it something a bit more interesting. Either way, I don't really want to end on a negative note with Orisa, so we'll say I do generally like the new Orisa. It's just there's a few kind of long-term implications I'm a little bit on. But most of my time I've had on her, I've really enjoyed. She's very enjoyable, this new redesigned Orisa. Definitely, you take a lot more of an active role. You're making a lot more kind of decisions on your own with this new Orisa. As for the new Doomfist, I might not have much footage of him on screen right now, just because I'm a little bit nervous to play him. I have played a couple games with him, but it seems like the new Doomfist is... Well, there are some people who've had a lot of success with the new reworked Doomfist, but it seems like unless you really know what you're doing with him, he's underpowered to most players. If you're a casual player and you pick up Doomfist, you're probably not going to do too well. But as I say, he's been completely reworked and now he's a tank instead of a DPS, which, to be honest, some people were very weirded out by that, but that actually made a lot of sense to me, because actually, before before Doomfist was even added, but it was speculated he was going to be added, I always thought he was going to be a tank. I mean, to be fair, we didn't know what he looked like yet, but I always kind of envisioned him as like this evil kind of counterpart to Reinhardt in a way, instead of having a giant suit of armor, just having a giant metal fist. Like, I expected he would be a tank, and I was a bit disappointed when he was a DPS, so to me it actually fits for him to be a tank. As a result, he's received a lot of changes, but the general crux of it comes down to he has received less damage, but now he has much more health, and he has new abilities, obviously. His health is up to 450, which might sound like a lot, but every tank also got its health buffed in Overwatch 2, which means that I believe Doomfist is the weakest tank in terms of just pure health in Overwatch 2. Don't even think he has any armor. I think it's just 450 pure health. So he's the most vulnerable tank. This is a problem because, and we will get into this later, But, of course, now it's 5v5, and it used to be 2 tanks, 2 healers, 2 DPS. Well, usually there would be 2 of each, but now it's 5v5, they've got to take one away, and the one they took away was tank. So if you pick Doomfist, you are the only tank on the team, and you only have 450 health. Which means that you have a lot of responsibility on you, because obviously teams usually play around their tank. They're kind of usually the leaders of their push. If you're the only person who's well equipped to lead a push on your team, and you don't even have that much health, obviously it can be a very stressful time, and you can see very easily why Doomfist is one I'm describing as something you probably shouldn't pick up if you're a bit more of a casual player, and probably only play if you're confident with him. So anyway, essentially his uppercut ability got removed, but they changed his seismic slam to essentially not need the uppercut, because now it works kind of like Winston's leap. Essentially, you jump into the air, and when you land, you do a seismic slam for 50 damage. It also no longer knocks people towards you when you land, but if I remember right, it applies a slight slowdown effect when you land it. His punch is the same as ever. Well, for the most part. It basically does the same thing. It still stuns, it still knocks people into walls, and that does more damage and all that. It still goes really far and all that. It's just that now its damage is halved, which does change a lot about how you use it. Now it's used a lot less as a way to actually kill people, and more as an interrupt, kind of like Sombra's hack, and more as a mobility option in a lot of situations, rather than as an actual kill move. Which you might be disappointed to hear, especially because the punch was obviously such a massive part of Doomfist's kick back when he was a DPS. But don't worry, there's still ways you can make this kill, and we'll get to that now. Because Doomfist's new ability that replaced Uppercut is an ability where essentially he'll hold out his fist in front of him and block any attacks that hit him while he's doing it. During this time, he only takes 10% of the damage he should, so you will still get hit, but only marginally. And if you are hit while doing this, it will charge up your next punch. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think it does just change it back to his normal punch damage. So if you can charge this punch with that block move, then yes, you can go back to just killing people in one punch. The other thing about him is that I believe that there were no changes to his pellets. In fact, I think the only change there was, if I remember right, they come back faster now, so you can even shoot them more often. They still do the exact same amount of damage they did when he was a DPS, so that is a much more effective DPS option now as Doomfist, to instead of trying to kill people with your punch, to try and kill them with your normal fire. Oh yeah, and I nearly forgot, Meteor Strike now also slows people when hit by it. Overall, the new Doomfist is a little strange, and I will fully admit it's not clicked with me. I have not figured out how you're supposed to play him. It just feels like he would be fine if he could be run with another tank, like Doomfist with a Reinhardt, Doomfist with a D.Va, whatever. Someone else who can do a good job of keeping the team alive, and then this Doomfist essentially acting like a DPS almost, but just one that can survive on his own a little bit better than most DPSs. If that was the case, then I could imagine him being pretty good. But in the world of 5v5, I feel like, yeah, this is a character that you only touch if you really know what you're doing with him. And that being said, we have seen some crazy stuff from the new Doomfist from people who clearly know what they're doing with him. I'm not saying that he seems really weak, I really can't say. But now we're done with the quote-unquote new characters, let's get to the real big deal of this video. That if you already were into Overwatch before you watched this, you were probably wondering why I haven't mentioned it yet. Now, before Overwatch 2 beta came out, we were very, very, very concerned that tank role would just be dead. This was because even before Overwatch 2's beta came out, tank was by far the least popular role to pick in games because of the fact that because of just generally update after update, damage had gone up in the game, which made high health characters less effective. And also the fact that new characters being added to the game meant there was more and more stuns in the game. And obviously stuns are really easy to land on a big fat target with lots of health. Yeah, tanks got to the point where towards the end of Overwatch 1's life, they essentially just existed to eat stuns and damage constantly and get melted for just trying to exist for longer than a second. Unfortunately, there were just so many characters added to the game over time that practically existed just to absolutely destroy tanks. Probably the worst offender was the last character added to the game, Echo, who I really despise. Look, I do think her ultimate ability is really cool, the ability to copy an enemy and turn into them, and then if you deal enough damage with them before the ult wears off, be able to use then their ult. I think that's a really cool idea. What I don't like is literally everything else about this character. The fact that they are a flying character that can deal massive damage just with their normal shots, that doesn't really have many interesting gimmicks, and probably the most interesting thing they have besides their ult is probably one of the most cancerous abilities ever added to Overwatch, which is her Focusing Beam, which is a pathetic move which barely does any damage under normal circumstances, except for the fact that it does go through stuff like Genji's Deflect and all that, and through D.Va's Defense Matrix. But when you use it on someone who's got half or less health, it deals quadruple damage. And let me tell you, dealing quadruple damage is not okay. Especially because, yes, against other DPSs that's fine, because for most of them, less than half health is less than 100 health, which really isn't that much, so you're not going to exactly be dealing quadruple damage for long. But then you show up to a Roadhog, who of course would have 300 health left still, and then you just melt it in a second, because that's still technically less than half. Yeah, I don't like this character. And that does hurt everyone else who plays the game as well, because you have to wait to find a game with, of course, 2 of every role, which means that the more tank becomes a horrible role that no one wants to play, that gets more and more frustrating and less enjoyable, the longer you have to wait in queue to find a game as a support or a DPS. To the point where now sometimes you get DPS players waiting 40-50 minutes to get a competitive game, just because they can't find anyone at their skill level who wants to play tank. So taking away one of the tanks in Overwatch 2 just seemed like a recipe for disaster. Especially because even though we didn't know much about Overwatch 2, we did already know what Soujorn was going to be like for the most part, and we knew that her railgun was going to go completely through shields as well, which is generally a tank's forte. So with DPS continuing to be the role that received the most favoritism as always, and with the new hero added being another DPS who seemed to have another ability which specifically screwed over tanks, when they're taking away a tank from the game, and in general, just over the game's life, damage just kept getting higher, and it didn't seem like that was going to stop in Overwatch 2. Yeah, we had a lot of reason to be terrified that tanks would just be dead on arrival. And yet, tank has ended up being one of the most fun and enjoyable roles in Overwatch 2. It's come out great, actually. Maybe still DPS is more popular, but still, both DPS and tank are an absolute blast in Overwatch 2. In fact, what happened was that support got screwed, but we'll get to that in a moment. How did they do it, though? How did they make it so that tanks were actually really enjoyable in Overwatch 2 and actually thrived, despite it seeming like everything was against them? You might have thought it was the fact that just generally every tank in the game had received some buffs, but I think for the most part, most of these buffs are just small little bonuses that help a little bit, but aren't really the meat of it. The main reason why tanks are so much better in Overwatch 2 is because there is one massive overhaul that affects nearly every character in the game that I actually honestly believe they wouldn't have had the balls to do. But sure enough, they went and did it. In Overwatch 2, for the most part, there are basically no stuns left in the game. Off the top of my head, the only examples of stuns I can still think of that are still in the game are Ana's Sleep Dart, if you consider that a stun, but of course that's cancelled the moment you take any damage. Abilities that stun, but only like stun for like literally half a second, stuff like Doomfist Punch, Orisa's Javelin, as I mentioned, stuns, Sigma's Rock, and the only other stuns that are still in the game, I believe, off the top of my head, I think there's literally no other stuns except in Ultimates. Even Mei's Freeze has been removed from her kit. She can still slow people down with her primary fire, and it deals now massively increased damage to compensate, but you can't freeze people anymore unless you use her ult. And the big reason why I thought they'd never have the balls to do this is because even though this seemed like an obvious pick, like, oh yeah, obviously you should do that to be able to, like, you know, make the game better, it came down to essentially 2 characters where their stun is such an enormous part of who they are as a character that I thought they would never do it. The first of those 2 is Brigitte, who obviously their Shield Bash stun is basically the whole reason they're even good. Yes, her Inspire passive is also really, really good, but I think the Shield Bash matters more. I mean, the main reason she's considered so good is because Zenyatta is busted as long as he has a bodyguard, and, well, Brigitte is the perfect bodyguard for Zenyatta. And the reason that Brigitte is the perfect bodyguard is, of course, the Shield Bash. But that one I could see them potentially changing. They just have to replace Shield Bash with some kind of new ability. What I honestly couldn't have seen happening was them ever taking away McCree's flashbang. I really thought they'd never have the guts to do it. I thought that they would never want to do it. Just because McCree's been around since literally the beginning of the game's life. He was there from the very beginning, and he's always been this very simple but fun and straightforward to play DPS. And, you know, the flashbang fan the hammer combo, it's just so iconic. I just thought they would never get rid of that. It doesn't matter how much of a problem it is and how unhealthy it is to the game, they'd never get rid of it, I thought. Well, it turns out they got rid of it, and I mean, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm pleasantly surprised they had the guts to do it. Now, instead, McCree has a magnetic grenade, which means he actually surprisingly does play pretty similar to how he used to. You see, the reason that Flashbang was so useful with McCree is because the main use of McCree is that he wins duels. In a 1v1 situation, McCree tends to win, since he's got a gun that's so accurate it's not too hard to get headshots. He's obviously got Fan the Hammer if he needs burst damage up close to be able to close out a kill before he dies. He's got the dodge roll if he's reloading at an inconvenient time and he needs to instantly reload. And of course the flashbang is the ultimate, oh, you thought you won this duel? Psych. And while the magnetic grenade is certainly not as good as the flashbang, McCree with the flashbang was already one of the strongest DPSs in the game. With the magnetic grenade, it still seems that McCree is absolutely good. The magnetic grenade itself will, first of all, it only works at short range, because if you try to throw it at long range, it will explode before it reaches its target. But to compensate, because it's magnetic, what it will do is if you slightly miss, it will actually steer itself into the enemy and still stick onto them. When it first lands on them, it deals 1 damage, and that's just so it wakes them up if they're like on a sleep dart or something. And then a couple seconds later, it'll explode, which will deal 130 damage to whoever it was stuck on, and also if there's anyone standing next to them, it can deal up to 65 damage to them. This does mean that McCree essentially plays the same. You just have to land a body shot and then magnetic grenade someone, and they're dead. The only difference now, which is a drawback for McCree players, but I do think is relatively healthy, is that you have to make sure you don't die in the process. Yes, it's very easy for you to win the duel just with 1 body shot and a magnetic grenade, but of course, even though the enemy knows they're dead to that grenade, they still have a couple seconds to try and make you pay for it. But again, that's fair, really. It means that McCree doesn't have a get-out-of-jail-free card. He can basically guarantee that he's either going to win the duel or both of you are going to die. But he can't guarantee that he's going to be the one that wins the duel and he'll walk out of it alive. So anyway, got a little sidetracked just because I thought I needed to talk about McCree there. And don't worry about Brigitte, we'll get back to her. But with all that said, because of the removal of so many stuns in the game, tanks were now free to do what they wanted again, for the most part. They're no longer suffering a constant barrage of just freeze, stun, freeze, punched, pinned, oh, now I've been melted by Echo's focusing beam. That's not the case anymore. And in fact, what helped even more, which I don't think I've seen anyone talking about, but I actually think is huge, is the rework of the armor mechanic. You see, this always bothered me in Overwatch 1. Apparently it got changed quite a few times, but I'm just going off of what it was most recently. Armor in Overwatch 1 I didn't like because it felt like it just existed to counter certain heroes and deal basically nothing in terms of damage resistance to other heroes. How it used to work is that if you had armor and you got shot, you would simply take 5 less damage than you would have if that health was normal health. Wow, that really isn't a lot. You might be wondering how armor even provided any tangible benefit at that amount. And the true answer to that is, it really didn't unless you were against a specific hero. Against people like Tracer or D.Va, yeah, the armor did a whole lot for you because of the fact that they shot lots and lots of little pellets, and each one of those pellets would have their damage reduced by 5. Armored targets would be borderline unkillable when being shot at by people like them. But of course, most of the characters of the game don't have weapons like that, and characters who just shot, you know, normally, like McCree, or shot slowly, like Widowmaker, yeah, you basically couldn't even notice the difference armor was making. Now, of course, there's a little bit more to it than that, because what would happen if you got dealt 5 damage and then reduced it by 5? You just deal 0 damage. How it works, if I remember correctly, is that if it would deal 10 damage or less, it would instead deal half damage instead of doing 5 less. So you could still shoot someone with lots of pellets of 2 damage, it would just deal 1 damage each instead of 2 damage. Now, if I remember correctly, Tracer's guns deal 6 damage per pellet, so yeah, you would literally be dealing half the damage against an armored target. A good way to put this and really demonstrate how stupid this was to me is if a Tracer decides they want to 1v1 a D.Va in Overwatch 1, they essentially have to deal 900 damage to them to get them out of their mech. Whereas if a McCree decides they want to 1v1 a Tracer, they essentially only have to deal, was it 630 damage, I believe, to get them out of their mech? Yeah, it would be 630. Yeah, that really demonstrates just how insane the difference is. So anyway, all that to say, now how armor works is a lot different, and I much prefer it. Essentially, whenever you get hit, as long as any amount of the health you lost was armored health, you take 30% less damage no matter how much the damage amount was. I believe this actually means now that the opposite is true, that now when you shoot people with lots of little pellets, it's more effective than hitting them with slow, strong shots. So this new armor rework, combined with the fact that just in general, tanks have more health now, and a lot of them gained armor, means that a lot of them can really take a lot of hits, and they can't be forced into a situation where no matter how much health they have, it doesn't really matter, because they can't be constantly stunned into that situation. Overall, this is all good news for tanks, but not for supports. But that might be a topic for another time. I originally planned to cover my thoughts on supports in Overwatch 2, especially being an anime in this video, but I didn't want to make it too long, and well, I kind of had to cover a lot of ground to get everyone who doesn't know that much about Overwatch up to date, while also, you know, talking about all the new features and why it happened. Rest assured though, I definitely will be making a video on the support experience in Overwatch 2. For anyone who simply cannot wait, essentially, if you weren't already aware, the general opinion is that support is garbage in Overwatch 2, and it is absolute hell having to play them. And I will give you the short version of my opinion, although there's a lot more to it, obviously, that would warrant a much longer video. Because it is quite a divisive issue at the moment, I guess. Because there are a lot of people who think that support players are just complaining because we didn't get enough new content. Which is very true. Supports received little to no changes, and of course we got no new support heroes. That really hurts. It definitely makes the game less fun to play when your main role gets basically nothing new to play with. Meanwhile, tanks are more fun than they've ever been at any point in Overwatch, and DPSs, as always, get to have all the reworks, all the characters, and all the fun. So there's a lot of people who think that supports actually are completely fine right now, and that support players are just whining because they didn't get new stuff. And my position on this is kind of square in the middle of both of those. It kind of makes me sad to see some people so quick to assume that supports are just complaining because they didn't get new stuff, who don't even play support. Because it is basically completely inarguable that the experience of playing support is much worse in Overwatch 2, at least in terms of how well it feels like you can do. However, there are some people who seem to be presenting it as there is no point in even trying with support on Overwatch 2. If you could, you would just not even run supports, you know. Basically thinking, oh, the only way to go is to play DPS, healing is pointless. And I will say it's not hopeless for supports in Overwatch 2, it's not quite that bad. This is a situation where you can adapt. The only thing is that even after you adapt, you will be the role at the biggest disadvantage. It's just that it won't exactly be unplayable once you adapt. That being said, the experience of playing support 5v5 in Overwatch 2 without having adapted to all the changes is awful. My first day playing Overwatch 2, I essentially had nothing but defeats on support. Almost every game I died 4 more times than I killed someone, and I got way less healing done than I would have liked because I spent every single second getting dived and getting no help from any of my team. However, the way it is now, it's a mixed bag. Now that I've had some time to adapt to Overwatch 2, it definitely still feels like supports are worse off, but more in a kind of, it's not as good way than in a, oh god, this is unplayable way. Anyway, I should cut myself off there before this short version of my opinion becomes another 20 minutes to this video. To close this off though, there is one new feature I just realised I haven't talked about yet, because I was going to mention it in the support section, which I cut out of this video. And that is that every role now has their own new passive. And the reason why I was going to save that for the support section is because this new passive is quite minor for every role except support. And that is the one good thing that support got, is that this new passive, in my opinion, is actually quite big. Damage heroes now move 10% faster. It's nice, but it's hard to notice. Tanks get 30% knockback reduction, which isn't that effective, but what's more effective, even though it's hard to tell, is that you now give the enemy 30% less ult charge for letting them shoot you. This was a big deal because tanks being both a bigger and easier target to shoot, while also having more health to shoot at, meant that they gave you more ult charge despite the fact they were easier to shoot in Overwatch 1, which only continued to contribute to the bullying of tanks. Now with this new passive, people are less rewarded for constantly bullying the easy targets. But the big one that supports got is that now all supports will start to regenerate 15 health a second if they manage to go a second without getting shot. Even supports who could already regenerate health, in which case the health regeneration will stack with whatever health regeneration they already had, like with Mercy. And this health regeneration is treated as normal healing, which can be denied by Ana's anti-nades, or amplified by her, normal bio grenades. But we'll get more into the implications of that new passive in the next video. Hope you guys enjoyed, I hope you guys are optimistic for the future of Overwatch, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.